Hi everyone, I am excited to welcome you to our webinar, Accelerate Your HITRUST Journey Through Inheritance. I am Jessica Brown and I will be your moderator today. On today's webinar, we'll start by introducing our speakers and their organizations. We will get a state of the market update, discuss what is the HITRUST Shared Responsibility and Inheritance Program, how it works, what are the benefits of inheritance, and how can inheritance partners like Cloudicity help organizations on their journey to HITRUST certification. Our experts that will take us through all of this today are Jerry Miller, founder and CEO at Cloudicity, and Ryan Patrick, VP of Adoption at HITRUST. I'll now hand it over to Ryan to share a little bit about HITRUST.
Thanks, Jess, and Jerry, thanks for joining me. Pretty excited about this conversation, and I kind of want to set the table right up front that this is a conversation, and you all out there in the audience are a part of the conversation. So just to reiterate, please submit your questions as they come to you. If it's something that we can address on the fly, I'd rather do that than wait until the end where we've moved on from topics. So do not hesitate. I encourage all of you to try to get as much out of this as possible. This is not going to be a really HITRUST 101 specific conversation. This is going to be very, very focused on inheritance and how it works and what the benefits are, so on and so forth. But just to give you a quick background, HITRUST has been around for just over 15 years now. It was born out of healthcare. Our founder and several other industry stakeholders came together to try to solve the problem of the HIPAA security rule and its subjectivity and the vagueness of the controls, so on and so forth. So they tried to put this framework together to be a bit more prescriptive to help organizations understand exactly what they need to do to comply with HIPAA. And we've done a whole lot since then. Our evolution and innovation is happening all the time. And, a couple highlights. One, we're not healthcare focused or solely focused on healthcare, I guess is a better way of putting it. We're industry agnostic at this point. We now have 3 certifiable assessment types. So think about them from a high, medium, low perspective from a risk scale. So it gives organizations an ability to adopt HITRUST or get on the HITRUST path, really kind of where you're at in your own maturity and your own compliance. And we're still innovating and evolving every day. So our framework is now mapped to over 40 what we call authoritative sources. So think about other standards, frameworks, regulations, laws, what have you. Everything from NIST to ISO, PCI, GDPR, and really everything in between is now mapped into the framework because HITRUST firmly believes in the concept of assess once, report many. We do not believe that you should be doing individual assessments for each market or each customer that you're working with. We want you all to be able to leverage the work that you do and apply that kind of across the board, because then we can actually get to the real work of growing businesses and actually making things a bit more secure. So we're going to get into a lot more about the inheritance program, but that's kind of a highlight. And I'll toss it over to Jerry to talk a little bit about Cloudicity.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. My name is Jerry Miller. I'm the founder and CEO at Cloudicity. We started our company a dozen years ago with a singular focus on helping healthcare organizations effectively leverage cloud technology. We manage about 100 million people's protected health information records. And so aligning with HIPAA regulations, with high-tech regulations, obviously is core to our technology. In our industry, the healthcare industry is the most attacked industry for cybersecurity breaches. And so translating the regulations from the HIPAA rules into a tangible framework that we can attest to has been critical. And so 6 or 7 years ago, we aligned with HITRUST and have developed a deep relationship around helping evolve both the HITRUST model, and we'll talk about that with inheritance and what that means. But in exchange for Cloudicity, for our customers, and ultimately for the patients that we serve, providing a provable landscape for both regulation and security. And in a dozen years, we're proud to say that, to our knowledge, we've never had a breach for any of the customers that we serve. And in large part, that's due to a lot of the work that we do around HITRUST and just attesting to the CSF framework. So very much looking forward to having this conversation today. Thanks, Ryan.
So I'll jump in here. What we want to do is we want to talk about inheritance, and it's actually a topic that a lot of people do not fully understand. But in discussing how we wanted to present the information, we wanted to kind of talk about where the market is today, not only from a security perspective, but from a cloud adoption perspective, because there is a huge migration to the cloud. And I'm going to defer to Jerry because he's the expert here. But we want to kind of set the context for the conversation kind of long term. So Jerry, do you want to jump into some of the things that you all are seeing from a cloud adoption perspective and some of the other factors?
Yeah, definitely. So the healthcare industry, they tend to be a bit traditional. Many of the technologies, if you think about payers, most of the claims systems are mainframe based. Many of the EHR deployments are on technologies that aren't readily migratable to the cloud. And so we've seen somewhat slower adoption, but we're definitely seeing in the health tech industry, we're starting to see in the imaging industry, we're starting to see in the analytics of health data, an accelerating cloud set of adoption. The challenge is that, cloud is a different set of technologies than data centers. And many of our customers initially try to adopt cloud technologies using the same management technologies that they've developed for their, on-premises data centers. But cloud, misconfigurations are one of the highest sources of data leaks. And cloud is highly attacked, and the knowledge about how to manage cloud is, it's a little bit lagging. And so we're seeing a lot of successful cyber attacks. And so adopting a framework like HITRUST CSF is critical for our customers to be able to validate that the deployments that they've put out there are safe and secure. On the other hand, cloud adoption allows a tremendous amount of agility. We see gigantic data sets, clinical data sets, genomic data sets, behavioral data sets, that if we're able to pull these together, the clinical efficacy and the ability to deliver better clinical outcomes is tremendously increased. And so by adopting the agility of cloud, our customers are able to better serve their population, which means in things like pandemic responses, people don't die. And so the importance of being able to leverage this technology, it results in better humanity. And so we think it's super important. But with the amount of cyber criminals out there, with the value of cloud health data on the black market, the need to adopt security frameworks is more important than ever. And so we think that the healthcare industry will tremendously benefit from cloud adoption. And we also think that we need to sort of bound that in a cybersecurity framework that protects the data while allowing the adoption of that greater agility and ability to move our technology forward for the betterment of human health.
Yeah, and to add on that, because Jerry, you hit on something I think is probably a common misconception or something that people don't realize is, the migration to cloud, which is happening in droves at this point. There's still an education gap.
Yeah.
And what to do when you're in the cloud and how to configure things. I actually heard a really great analogy from one of the major cloud providers. They talked about, for those of us who have homeowners associations, the HOA is responsible for the common areas and the upkeep of those common areas, whereas the homeowners are actually in charge of mowing their own grass and making sure that their house is painted and things of that nature. And the cloud is the same way, where that the cloud provider is going to do a lot of the work and take a lot of that weight off of your shoulders, but there's still a ton of work and a ton of responsibility that falls onto the systems that are built on top of the cloud. And, I hear it pretty consistently, Jerry, I'm sure you hear it too, through the lens of HITRUST. Oh, I'm going to get HITRUST certified because my cloud provider is HITRUST certified. And that's a common misconception. And people need to realize that there's a whole lot of work after you get up into the cloud to ensure that environment is operating the way that you need it and the way that your constituents, if you will, your stakeholders expect it to work in order to protect them and the data.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a shared responsibility model. And we talk about the difference between the security of the cloud versus security in the cloud. So security of the cloud, your cloud provider has their own data centers and they're responsible for physical security and access control and cooling and power and that sort of thing. But once you deploy your systems into that environment, you're responsible for how you design your application so that they're secure in the cloud. And so that shared responsibility is critical. And the misconception that if you move to cloud and you're automatically insulated from any challenges, it is something that we go to market every day with.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's a great segue into the next set of slides. And, what is shared responsibility? What is the inheritance program? Well, if you think about what Jerry and I were just talking about, there are responsibilities. If you have Cloudticity through whether it's through AWS or someone else helping you in the cloud, there is things that they're responsible for. There's things that you're responsible for, and it's really hard to provide transparent, consistent, reliable assurances or trust between organizations if you're not getting full visibility into the system as a whole. Think about the comprehensive nature of the system itself. So if you take a look at what's happened prior to HITRUST coming out with its shared responsibilities program, which is about 3 or 4 years old at this point, is a lot of times organizations would just kind of ignore the fact that they were in the cloud. They would just tell people, hey, I'm up in the cloud, and everybody would be like, okay, cool. But that doesn't mean that you're secure up in the cloud. So HITRUST firmly believes in the comprehensive look at the implemented system, which is including the cloud. So we've worked with all the major cloud providers, several other types of cloud service providers that provide very niche type of services up in the cloud. And I think we're at 20 plus organizations who have joined this program and have built they have built a matrix that you can reference in order to identify, okay, this control fully on the back of Cloudticity and the CSP. This control is partial, so I still own some of that responsibility. So it's very clear in what it's offering to you. And what we found is this reduces a lot of confusion, first of all, because there really is no questions for the most part on who's responsible for what, because all parties have come together and kind of agreed on this up front. It saves a lot of effort. And to a certain degree, it saves cost because now you don't have to go and try to hunt down your cloud provider to provide the relevant evidence for the controls that you're leveraging or they're managing on your behalf. So we've built this program ultimately to make life a little bit easier in providing these assurances, because trying to chase Azure, AWS, GCP, whomever, to get the evidence or get access, which is arguably not going to happen, it's too arduous and it doesn't make sense. But we do need that full transparency in order to provide the layer of trust that we want and we deserve. So if we can go to the next slide, I'm going to give you a quick snapshot here of what one of those matrices looks like. So you'll see that you have the HITRUST control written out. You have the domain that's a part of it. Talks about what the control is asking you to do. And then it basically breaks down whether it's partially inheritable, fully inheritable, not inheritable at all. So it's basically just follow the line and get the questions answered for you in order to build that transparency and build that comprehensive assessment so that the consumers of your certification report know exactly what's going on in that environment that they are going to either leverage or do business with.
And if you think about, we're talking about sharing physical infrastructure, but if you think about the way that modern applications are built, it's a microservices world, and in many cases, those microservices are outsourced. So if you are a provider and you want to text message a patient to remind them of an appointment, that text message is likely going to go out through Twilio or some outsourced service. So as we move into a world where infrastructure becomes more outsourced, we're also moving into a world where services become more outsourced. So shared responsibility, as we think about management of protected health information, becomes more and more important as we move away from infrastructure disbursement into a world of actual application disbursement. So this is the first, I think, of many steps as application development continues to evolve in a more microservices-oriented world.
Yeah, great point, Jerry. And we had a question come in that I think is something that we can answer pretty quickly and also relevant. It's this person is asking, when will the release of the matrix be updated for version 11? So those matrices are very specific to the inheritance provider's validated assessment, so their certified assessment. So as they move to version 11, that's when the matrices will be updated and the inheritance will be available. Which the logical next question is kind of when are they going to do that? Most of them are looking at that now or in the process of moving to version 11. All right, so we can go to the next slide. How does inheritance work? So I'm going to start painting a picture, and I'm going to ask Jerry to jump in to fill in some color commentary. If you think about what it would take for you to knock on AWS's door, visit their data center, and start doing full controls testing and validation, just the logistics of trying to get to the right person, to get through the door, to get through security, to get the proper credentials, what have you, that in and of itself would be an enormous feat. But once you're on the inside, if they allow you on the inside, then you've got to actually go through the full controls testing. So if you think about what HITRUST is asking organizations to do at the R2 level, so our most comprehensive and thorough certification assessment, there's 5 levels of maturity. It starts with policy, then it focuses on process, implemented, and then it's asked if you're measuring the effectiveness of control, and finally, are you managing that control? And that's based off the measurement. Are you going back to the first 3 and doing something to increase the effectiveness of the control? So immediately, doing testing and validation in someone else's facility is going to take time. And arguably, and I don't have the exact numbers off the top of my head, but for the physical environmental controls, the disaster recovery, business continuity type controls, those types of controls that would fall on the backs of the cloud service providers, there's arguably probably almost 100, right? So you do the math, 100 controls times 5 levels of maturity, the amount of time you're going to spend inside that facility is pretty significant. And you're going to be pulling resources from that cloud service provider to guide you around, answer your questions, to provide evidence. If they're allowing you to take pictures, if they're not, how do you actually get that evidence out so that your assessment can be as comprehensive as possible? So bottom line is it's a really arduous process to try to gain the visibility of what is happening in the cloud that you're built upon. So you think about the assessment timeline, it dramatically will increase that assessment timeline. What we see here at HITRUST for the average R2 is it takes organization 12 to 18 months to get through the whole process. And now a lot of that has to do with their maturity when they start the journey, but the get through the process itself is pretty significant. And going to knock on the doors of the AWSs of the world is only going to draw that out. So this is where, HITRUST was like, this is just untenable. This is not working. The market needs something better. But Jerry, any other thoughts on, what would the world look and feel like if inheritance didn't exist?
Well, we started with HITRUST in that world, so I can tell you exactly. We were the very first. Cloudticity has always been a virtual company, even prior to COVID. We never had offices. We've always been cloud-based. And we were the very first 100% cloud, 100% virtual company that ever went through the HITRUST process. And so there was an impedance mismatch, right? Like, our assessors insisted that we provide an address for a data center and that we provide access to the data center for a site visit, which, with AWS, it's just not possible. They don't publish that, and they're not going to let external entities come visit their data centers. So it was our assessment that was the genesis for, kind of thinking about this shared responsibility model and eventually the inheritance model. So we kind of grew up together with HITRUST. And so it's been great to see how HITRUST has evolved their models into really accommodating the way that modern computing works, both around shared responsibility and physical infrastructure, as well as application architecture. But exactly what Ryan said, those early days, those initial conversations around how do we facilitate those controls without the physical access to a data center, those were interesting conversations. And the resulting inheritance model is a great answer to that disconnect, that initial disconnect, which now has resulted in an accommodation of what modern architecture looks like.
Yeah, it's I can't stress enough how virtually untenable it was and is if you're not leveraging this program, at least in my humble and somewhat biased opinion. Yeah. So what I'd love to do, and Jerry's going to assist me in this, is we're going to kind of role play. What does it actually look like? So we just talked about what it feels like if there is no inheritance, but now we're going to actually show what it's like to go through the actual process of inheriting. So I've got an assessment up here. This is a demo assessment. We'll go into one of the controls. So we're in domain 1. So for those of you who are familiar with MyCSF, this is MyCSF. We're in domain 1, and I'm just going to pick a random control. It's as simple as coming down here. So typically what you would have to do if you were not inheriting, you would have to come in as the entity being assessed, and you'd have to score yourself in all 5 of these maturity levels, as I mentioned. You would also have to add comments. This is why I feel we are at 100% maturity for policy. Then you'd have to add evidence. So you have to upload documentation. So a lot of button clicks, a lot of typing, so on and so forth. Well, with inheritance, you just click the inheritance button here. You select what type of inheritance. There's external inheritance, there's internal inheritance. And we're specifically focused on external inheritance in this conversation. Happy to, during the Q&A, if there's interest, to talk through how people are leveraging internal inheritance, but we'll stick with external. So external inheritance is selected. I go to the provider that is in the shared responsibilities program. So in this case, it's this Pelican hosting company that has their R2 assessment published for inheritance. I select that and I hit add. Now, I did see a question pop up before I started sharing my screen around who decides the level or percentage of inheritance. So it's like any good security professional, I'm going to answer you with it depends, right? It's very unique in every circumstance, but that matrix that I showed you the screenshot for earlier, it's going to give you whether fully or partial. If it's fully, it's going to be 100%. The cloud service provider has already agreed that that is solely on their backs. They own all the responsibility. If it's partial, then it gets a little bit more hairy. So you, along with your external assessor, and I highly, highly encourage everybody, if you are not working with an external assessor and you're starting to build your inheritance strategy, get with an external assessor. They're the ones that are going to guide you through the process. They're doing it every single day. As a recovering external assessor, I can tell you that I knew more about what HITRUST and the cloud service providers were looking for in this than the average customer did. So lean on them as much as possible. All right, I'm off my soapbox. So think about the in-scope systems when thinking about percentages. So if 25% of the in-scope systems through the lens of the specific control are up in the cloud, then you're going to put 25 in here. So it almost becomes a math equation, but I don't want to give, hard and fast rules because each scope, each assessment, and each control and how it relates to the services you're consuming in the cloud will dictate the percentages. So it becomes a bit of a conversation. Typically, we don't see cloud providers pushing back super hard as long as it's a reasonable request based on the services they see you consuming. So in this case, we're going to say it's 100% of the control. I'm going to hit save. No, I'm not going to hit save. These didn't work. When this reloads, we'll go to a different control because I removed a control earlier and it didn't like me for it. We'll go to domain 18 because that one is actually probably one that you'll definitely inherit from. So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to come into this control. External inheritance is not available. So I'm going to go back to of course, whenever you do something live, this is when the drama starts happening, Jerry. Let's just do this. Let's just resubmit this one and see if that will work. All right, saved. We like that. So that was a little more painful than it normally was, but now we're going to go on the other end. So this is what Jerry and his team would see. So this is the actual Pelican Hosting 9.4 assessment on their end. So Jerry, I'll let you guide me. Where do you want me to go? What do you want me to do?
Yeah, so let's look at the inheritance requests. So on the Cloudticity side, we get a notification that one of our customers has requested to inherit a control from us. And so we'll click on that external inheritance. We'll see what the requests are. We'll look at the submitted requests. We'll click in there and we'll say, okay, if maybe the customer thinks that they want to wait 100%, which means that all of the liability and the control management relies on Cloudticity. We can either agree and say yes, in which case that inheritance happens automatically. We might push back a little bit and say, you think it's 100%, we might think it's 75%. Let's talk about that gap and how we bridge that. With the MyCSF tool, we have the ability to communicate back and forth with the customer. We can add notes. But eventually we'll settle on the right level, which is that shared responsibility where Cloudticity takes a certain amount of liability and the customer takes either some or no liability. We get when a client goes through a high trust process, we might get hundreds of these. And so, inside of Cloudticity, we have a process and an SLA. We will generally respond within a week or so. We work with the three major cloud providers, AWS, Azure, and Google. They generally have a good, response time. And so, the process it's pretty lightweight, it's pretty painless, and it's really more of a negotiation between how our customer thinks about their inheritance of the control and how Cloudticity thinks that we can provide that level of detail and accept that level of liability.
So at this point, let's say we agree here, Jerry. So you would select this, assuming that there's more. There's some you're going to approve, some you may want to go back and forth with. So we hit approve. So now we go back on the other end, and I will refresh the assessments. We come in here, and now you can see 100% inheritance applied, and now these scores are what was pulled in from the other assessments. So you actually get to see how your cloud service provider scored on their high trust assessment. So it's really as simple as that. When there isn't a clown like me trying to operate this who doesn't use it every single day. But so it's just that simple. And it gives the organization, as I've said several times, and I'll probably continue to say throughout this conversation, is it gives you, as well as your stakeholders or the consumers of your high trust certification, greater visibility into what is actually happening within the environment that they're going to leverage in whatever way, shape, or form that might be. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
And while you're doing that, I see some questions coming in around inheritance requests across different versions, 9.4, 9.6, 11. There are mappings, and we'll talk about the service matrix. There are mappings that allow inheritance across versions. And if there's not a direct mapping, we've worked directly with the high trust leadership to be able to resolve that. So people don't have to be on the exact same framework to be able to effectively leverage the inheritance process.
Okay, next topic. In what ways does inheritance benefit my organization? Jerry, as someone who is not only an inheritance provider, but also a consumer of inheritance, I'll let you take the first stab at this.
Yeah, for sure. If we can go to the next slide. So HITRUST has, as we continue to move through versions, there are hundreds to potentially thousands of controls. I think the largest level of certification is around 1,800 controls. Each one takes hours to dozens of hours of time. And so many high trust assessors charge per control. There's a amount of internal effort necessary to assemble the evidence and to address the control and to go back and forth with the assessor. So the direct cost as well as the internal disruption to be able to answer those controls can become tremendous. It accumulates over hundreds and hundreds of controls in any given high trust assessment. So anytime that you can short circuit that, as you saw, even though we had like a technical glitch, it still only took minutes to inherit versus dozens of hours. And so being able to address technical requirements of a high trust assessment in minutes versus hours over hundreds or thousands of controls, the accumulated savings and lowered level of disruption can be tremendous. And the third factor is the time to actually getting through the assessment. So as Ryan mentioned, initial assessments can take up to 18 months. What if we could reduce that to 12 or 8 or 6 months? And so we're seeing many of our clients, their clients are insisting on high trust compliance. And So being able to meet contractual requirements, being able to attest more quickly so that our clients can sell better or, be compliant with RFPs that they're answering, the ability to reduce the time, the cost, and the internal disruption of attaining a HITRUST certification while still maintaining that high bar of certification. There's no lowering of the requirements. It's just kind of sharing that responsibility across multiple entities. These have become key as we've participated in this inheritance program over the last several years.
Yeah, if we can go to the next slide, yeah, this one. So logically, you may be wondering, what percentage of the controls out there are inheritable in some way, shape, or form. So the R2 is a little bit hairy, if you will, because there is 2,000 plus controls in the current version 11 of the CSF. So depending on what you select and what you pull into your assessment, this may change a bit, but it's roughly 70% of the controls in the CSF in the R2 are inheritable. For the I1, it's 75%, and for the E1, it's 85%. And for those of you who may not know what the E1 consists of, the E1 is designed to be the absolute floor from a security controls perspective, the things that every organization at a minimum should be doing from a security perspective to have the lowest amount of coverage or the lowest amount of protection. And what I like to tell folks is, if you're not doing these 44 things, you need to rethink your life, because you're about to invite headache and heartache into your future. It's the absolute essentials, just like it sounds like. There's 44 of those controls. So if you do the math real quick, that's about 7 controls that are not either fully or partially inheritable. So the access to getting an E1 through an E1 is much higher than access to HITRUST generally has been in the past. So pretty significant stuff from a percentages perspective, a lot of capability out there. Again, I would offer lean on your external assessors to provide guidance. And I think I saw another question really quickly out of the corner of my eye come in around their role in this process. Think of them as mentors, guides, Sherpas. They ultimately don't really have any decision authority per se. They may push you hard based on their experience and their knowledge, but it's really a conversation between you and the cloud service provider on what the level of inheritance is that's going to be accepted. So that's why it's right now between you as the assessed entity and the cloud service provider and MyCSF. You two have to come to an agreement. Again, the external assessors will have an opinion. I think you should trust their opinion. They're doing this every single day, but just to make it perfectly clear, it's really between those two organizations. They will have to validate the level of percentage, though. That still is a responsibility of theirs. So I saw something come in real quick about internal inheritance. We don't have an example queued up for an internal inheritance, but really quickly, because it's on this slide and I've mentioned that we would bring it up perhaps in a future slide. Internal inheritance really at the simplest level is you inheriting from you. So if you have a currently certified assessment in your profile, in your subscription, you can actually look to get that published for inheritance. In order to do that, I suggest you contact your customer success manager, your CSM at HITRUST. They can walk you through what you need in order to do that. But as soon as you publish it, it should be one of the drop-down selections, and it's exactly the same way, or it's completed exactly the same way as you just saw. So there's a lot of merit to the internal inheritance program. I've seen it used in a lot of different ways. One, for M&A activity. I've seen it for very large organizations who may have shared services, R2 certified, and business units are either E1 and I1 certified. So there's lots of use cases for internal inheritance as well. So I'll pause there on internal inheritance. maybe we can move on to the next slide and talk about really what Cloudticity can do to help you all get through this process.
Yeah, so like I said, we are at Cloudticity a managed services, managed security, and managed compliance partner for healthcare workloads on cloud. We've been R2 certified, I don't know, it's 6 or 7 years now. We offer just under 400 inheritable controls, which I think is industry leading. We help our customers get HITRUST certified, not just through the inheritance program, but because we've been at this for so long and we've partnered so closely. We're always platinum sponsor at the HITRUST conference. We know this industry kind of in and out. We've been on so many working groups, collaborating with HITRUST as they continue to evolve their frameworks. Our passion is helping every human on earth get healthier through the work that we do. Part of that is protecting healthcare data. We have 100 million healthcare records under our stewardship, and being safe stewards of that as we help our customers help their patients is critical for our ability to meet our vision. And HITRUST is one of our core vendors or core partners as we think about making sure that we're doing the right things to protect data so that we and our customers can really think about innovation and healthcare, moving the healthcare industry forward, as opposed to spending day in and day out thinking about security. So HITRUST has provided sort of a core framework for us to ensure that we're doing the right things around building a secure and a trusted framework so that our customers can think day to day about helping the patients that they serve. So some statistics, we know that we've done the math. We know that our customers save 25 to 62% of time, which translates directly into reduction in time, not only to achieve HITRUST, but reduced cost as well as reduced internal disruption to achieve that sort of high bar around HITRUST R2. So Ryan, if you want to address, sort of like the recast around how E1, I1, and R2 are better aligned with CSF V11, I think that's a salient point as well.
Yeah. So before version 11 came out, we really had the R2 and the I1 as of last year, and there was overlap, but there wasn't a nesting, if you will, between the two assessments. And with version 11, with the release of the E1, we deliberately made a decision, partially or maybe more than partially because of direct market feedback, to align and kind of build a fully nested portfolio. So the E1 has 44 controls. Those 44 controls are at the core of the I1. The I1 has 182 controls. So 182 controls, inclusive of the 44 from the E1, are at the core of the R2. So it actually makes your journey from E1 through I1 to R2, or wherever your destination may be, that much easier because you're not losing any of the work that you previously had done. So any controls that you inherited now in the E1, you are likely going to be able to inherit through the I1 and into the R2 again, wherever your destination might be. Now, that may beg the question for those really HITRUST savvy people. What about when you cross versions? There's always a possibility that a control may have been changed or tweaked or removed or added. So we typically will build a spreadsheet that shows you what the changes are from version to version, and we have a cross-version referencing spreadsheet that we can provide so you know exactly what has changed and how that inheritance has changed from those versions. But if you are staying on the same version, those controls will stay perpetually through E1, I1, R2, which again, tremendous time savings, cost savings, frustration savings. It just makes life a lot easier now that we've nested the assessment portfolio. So I think that was the last content slide, and we've had a whole slew of questions coming in. Jess, any of those jump out of you?
Yeah, so I just want to remind everyone, if you want to submit a question, you can do so in the Q&A panel on the bottom right of your screen. Just type in your question and make sure you hit it to go to all panelists so that we all can see it and try to answer it. There were a lot of questions, so let me just start. There was a question specifically around the shared responsibility matrix that we showed. There's a badge on it that says HITRUST R2 Certified Inheritance Partner. The question is what is it, and what if the organization that wants to inherit the controls is not that level of certification? Is that okay?
So yeah, there's a bit of a misnomer there that it's not a change in certification level. It's just that they've taken their certification, joined the program, and published it for inheritance. So there's not a special inheritance provider certification. So really anybody can publish their assessment for inheritance. Again, I recommend that you get with your HITRUST customer success manager to kind of walk through what that entails. Depending on what subscription level you have from ICSF, will dictate whether you can do it today or there may be a change in the future. So I will defer, or I will direct you to your customer success manager, because they will have your very unique circumstance well underhand, whereas I'm going to be talking about things kind of generally. But just to be clear, there's no separate inheritance provider certification. This is just the fact that these organizations have joined the program and have published their assessments for inheritance.
And to add to that, because we talked about how in version 11, the 3 levels are nested. Any lower, like an E1, can always inherit from an R2, right? So any of the controls at a lower level of certification will be incorporated in the higher level of certification.
And just to piggyback off of that, and vice versa. Right. So if you have an E1 that is certified and you have an R2 assessment that you're working on, if the control that's in the E1 is in the R2, which I've said they are, you can actually inherit from that E1 certified assessment into the R2.
Yep. Yeah. And you can do that from an external provider. And if you're doing multiple internal certifications, you can also do the internal inheritance.
Great. If you're completing a HITRUST 9.6.2 validated assessment, can you inherit from a service provider that was assessed under 9.2 or 9.4?
Yes, with the caveat that as long as the control is still in that version and it hasn't changed drastically, if the elements haven't changed drastically, then yes, you should be able to inherit from an older assessment or vice versa. Again, we do have the breakdown on where the changes are and cross-versioning and things of that nature. And I encourage you to get with your CSM so they can get you the exact information for your unique circumstance.
And we've seen cases at Cloudticity where there's a slight impedance mismatch between versions, and we've always been successful at working with HITRUST to resolve it. So if there's a one-off situation that doesn't exactly map, HITRUST is very flexible in terms of making sure that we're still achieving the right bar, but doing the right thing for our mutual customers.
Awesome. This next one, if I have 2 third parties, party A and party B, providing partial inheritance, and party A is 50% and party B is 50%, can they get 100% inheritance?
Short answer is yes.
Yeah, as long as you don't own any of that responsibility, then yes.
Yeah, you can take a control and apply multiple vendors and request inheritance from vendor A, vendor B for the same control at 50% each. So yes. And as Ryan said, of course, it is as long as that makes sense. And in the end, you don't own the responsibility, but inheritance can come from multiple parties per control.
Yep.
Okay. Sorry, I'm just watching questions come through and trying to. Is there any plan to make the max percentages available for those controls that are partial?
Hold on, let me see if I can find the question because I'm not sure I quite understood it.
I think that's in the SRM, right?
Well, can you repeat the question again, Jess?
Is there any plan to make the max percentages available
Oh.
for those controls that are partial?
Yes, it's on the roadmap. I can't tell you exactly when that will be available, but I can tell you that HITRUST is working on the next evolution of inheritance, and we're aptly naming it it's called Inheritance 2.0, and there's going to be a lot of new capabilities that comes out with Inheritance 2.0, like pre-approved inheritable requirement statements and, defining inheritance right up front in scoping so you don't have to go kind of line by line. So there's lots of innovation that's happening on the inheritance front, and it's on the roadmap. So yeah, that should be available in the future.
Great. How far back can you inherit internally from your previous HITRUST validated assessments?
As long as it is still a certified assessment, you should be able to inherit from it. So if it's an R2, arguably through that 2-year period. If it's an E1 or an I1, just for that 1 year.
Okay, cool. You may have already slightly touched on this, but I know there's a lot of questions about this, so I just want to bring it up again. But it seems like most of the larger cloud providers are still on 9.x. How is inheritance working for clients that move to version 11?
So people are leveraging inheritance as much as they can where it's available. If they're on 11 and their cloud provider is still on 9.6 or 9x, it's not going to, the level of coverage may not be as much as if both parties were on 9x on the same version. There is still overlap on those, but where there is a gap, again, I would encourage you to work with your external assessor. You can bring us in. HITRUST is more than happy to help answer questions, go over your very unique circumstances and situations, and kind of weigh in on those things. Don't think that there's a wall between you and HITRUST. Reach out to me. Reach out to your CSM. We'll help you get your questions answered.
All right. How widely adopted is inheritance?
So as I mentioned earlier, inheritance is about 4 years old, and it's had an upward trajectory, but we are still not seeing completely widespread adoption, primarily because I don't think people understand inheritance if they even know it exists. A lot of people don't know it exists, and that's why we're having sessions like this today to educate people. I hope everybody that's on the call right now starts, standing on the mountaintops and telling other organizations about the shared responsibilities program, because I do think it's a game changer in a lot of different ways. So it's adopted pretty consistently with assessed entities. The entities being assessed, that is starting to gain a lot of steam, a lot of traction, and now we're starting to get a lot more service providers joining the program. So public service announcements, shameless plug, if you have a service provider that you're working with and they're not an inheritance provider, you should tell them to become an inheritance provider, because it just makes your life and people like you a lot easier.
And conversely, I'll say that across Cloudticity's customer base, again, 100% healthcare, 100% cloud. HITRUST is like central to our service delivery model. A large percentage of our clients take advantage of inheritance. So it's maybe not broadly, generally, but in our particular vertical niche, many of our customers, and it's kind of core to our business model and core to the value that we sell into our customer base.
And you all are front runners and talking about it all the time. Hence the reason why we're doing this, because you're exactly the experts on it.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm just looking through the questions here. I think we covered most of them. Some of them are pretty specific, and so we'll follow up with you guys after on those. Here's one. If our vendor is HITRUST certified by their if our vendor is HITRUST certified by their but their assessment is not published in HITRUST, can we still inherit from them if the control is inheritable?
No, they have to be a part of the program and they have to publish their assessment. Period. End of sentence. Next sentence. You can rely on their HITRUST certification as evidence. So you still don't have to do it all on your own. You would just request their HITRUST certified report, and then that would become the evidence that you would rely upon. But again, shameless plug, talk to them about becoming a published inheritance provider.
I think this next question is similar to that. This one's somewhat unrelated, but if you're new to HITRUST, where can you go to learn more about this and certifications?
So you can reach out to us at HITRUST. You can, if you're specifically curious about inheritance, you can reach out to Jerry and his team on inheritance and to learn more. We're very available, so you can email me. I think you're going to get my contact information after this presentation. I'm happy to put you in touch with one of our senior product specialists who can walk you through all the different things that HITRUST is doing, not just from an inheritance perspective, but the framework, the certification, our third-party risk management, the whole 9 yards. You can go to our website. There's lots and lots and lots of information on our website. Visit the Cloudticity website. There's actually a wealth of information at your fingertips right there on the internet. Jess, while you're looking through some additional questions, I saw one come in that I can jump on pretty quickly. So someone asked, you're using the term control interchangeably with a requirement statement? I am. When I say control, I'm referring to requirement statements, but a requirement statement is, it's HITRUST lexicon. So I was trying to use a term that is, more understood by the general market. So when you hear me say control, there are controls in the HITRUST framework, but the individual statements that we saw in my CSF are actually referred to as requirement statements. So that person is absolutely correct.
Right. I think we've covered most of these to a point. Otherwise, some of them are pretty specific. So we'll follow up with y'all after to answer more of the specific questions to your situations. But I just want to thank Jerry and Ryan, both of you, for kind of talking through the HITRUST Shared Responsibility Inheritance Program and how you can inherit. And this brings us to the conclusion of our webinar today. So if you have any additional...
I have one last shameless plug for everybody. So
Absolutely.
Our annual conference, HITRUST Collaborate, is happening the first week of October. Both Jerry and I will be there. Both Jerry and I are probably speaking. Come ask your questions. Meet us at the bar. Come get a drink. We'll hang out and answer any question you got. But it'd be great to meet up with people. Come to the conference. We're covering everything from cyber insurance, third-party risk, inheritance, the expanded portfolio, AI, lots of different topics. So I'm sure Jess will send this out with the follow-up after this session, but I highly encourage everybody to come out and check this out.
Yeah, look forward to seeing everyone there. And thanks, everyone, for giving us a part of your day. Appreciate that.
Thanks so much.
Thank you all.
All right, have a great day. Thanks.